Hi, I'm Diego Cupolo. I'm the editor-in-chief of Turkey Recap, a newsletter based in Turkey. We cover politics and foreign policy and economics. Today, I'm going to be talking about what's been happening in Turkish politics and foreign policy for the last 3 or 4 months since October 2024. And that's quite a challenging period to cover because as viewers of this video will know, there's been a few wars and a Syrian regime change in the process. So I'll do what I can. I'll do some broad strokes and hopefully provide some insights on what's going on here in Ankara, where I'm based. So if I had to break it down, what's happened in the recent months, there's three main topics. There's a peace process between the state and Kurdish militia, the PKK. There's the Syria regime change and the impacts of that for Turkish foreign policy and influence in the region. And there's an ongoing fight against inflation, which seems to be getting very serious and consumers are feeling it. So I'm going to start with the peace process, which is linked to the Syrian issue and hopefully tie it all together in a way that makes sense. I'm going to try not to get too much into the names and the different acronyms, but please bear with me. I will try to make it as clear as possible. So President Erdoğan has a coalition partner in Turkey. His name is Devlet Bahçeli. He's a nationalist, and he has been very anti-Kurd throughout his entire career and has always taken an anti-PKK stance. Let's say he's an anti-Kurdish movement politician. There's Kurds that support the ruling coalition. I'll make that distinction. And basically, Devlet Bahçeli shook hands with pro-Kurdish movement, Dem Party officials in October when Parliament reopened this year for this session. And 2 or 3 weeks after that, he called for a kind of peace process to begin in Turkey, which is unprecedented and unexpected because we haven't heard of such a thing since at least, 10 years. The coup and aftermath, Turkey's been in a lot of volatile politics. So the prospects of a peace process was not on anyone's bingo card, let's say, for Turkish politics. So in introducing the idea for a peace process, Bahçeli invited PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan to give a speech in parliament. Right now, Öcalan is jailed in Turkey. He has been for 25 years and is #1 terrorist for many Turkish citizens. He's considered the Osama bin Laden of Turkey. So the idea that an Osama bin Laden would address Turkish public in parliament was absurd to many, but the gesture was sincere, and we've been living with the repercussions of that ever since. And I'll get into what that means because it's a very divisive topic. And it was made more divisive because the day after Bahçeli suggested starting a peace process, and this involves the PKK leaving their group and handing over their weapons, right? It's a full disbandment of the guerrilla movement that's existed in Turkey for 40 years. The day after this peace process was suggested, there was an attack that was linked by the PKK on a drone weapons technology firm in Ankara. Several people were killed. This was an obvious disruption to the peace process one day after it was announced, and it still remains contentious what's going on here. But I have to highlight this continues for several reasons. I'll get to them. But the main thing is that the ruling coalition between this nationalist politician and Erdoğan is pushing for this peace process to continue. And in the meantime, the pro-Kurdish delegation of politicians is visiting Öcalan in prison and is transmitting messages between the state, the public, and Öcalan in hopes of facilitating some kind of ceasefire, which we don't have the details of. We just know that the government wants the PKK to stop existing in exchange for some concessions, which have also not been made clear. So while this peace process is happening, Kurdish politicians are also being removed from their democratically elected positions in Turkey. There's been several acts where state-appointed trustees have replaced mayors. Many people see this as a very confusing picture. It is. But the way to look at it is that there's a discussion, it continues, and there's sticks and carrots. And more than anything, the majority of the public does not support this peace process. So the ruling coalition has to maintain a hardline stance on the Kurdish movement and the PKK, while also having an opening for some kind of resolution. And there was a recent poll published in mid-January here in Turkey showing that 22% of the public respondents support the idea of this peace process and the way that Bahçeli framed it. So you have 22% support for this. So why are they pushing for it, right? What's going on here? The main reason this is happening is because in hindsight, people think there were signs that something would happen in Syria. And this was preparation for any eventual disruptions in the Syrian balance of power. The peace process is linked to PKK-linked groups in Syria and having some kind of influence over them. And so by handling its domestic Kurdish issue, Turkey is also handling its foreign Kurdish issue. And the Kurdish movement continues regardless of what Turkey will do. It just depends how and where and how this is allowed. And that's what they're discussing. So the main reason this is happening is because of security for a Turkish state. Some people would say PKK has been dissolved and is not so active in Turkey, but they remain present in Iraq, North Iraq, and northern Syria, which present security concerns. And having some kind of resolution would be a crowning achievement for Erdoğan and his legacy. And he seems to, enjoy positive headlines, and this would be one. So the other reason this peace process is happening is to solidify the ruling coalition by drawing more Kurdish votes to Erdoğan's party and also the Nationalist Party. This would draw them away from the opposition, which won local elections in 2024 and has a little bit of momentum in that sense, but creating a successful peace process and drawing Kurdish votes would nullify the main opposition party, CHP, and present new challenges in voter support. The last reason this is happening is because the AKP and MHP want to amend the constitution, and this would likely mean that Kurdish politicians would support these constitutional amendments. What do they want to amend? It's not exactly clear, but most people believe Erdoğan wants to run for another term. He's been a leader of Turkey in one way or another for about 20 years now, and he's reaching presidential term limits, which some people say he already passed, but now he's looking for constitutional amendments that would extend that, and Kurds could help. Let's move on to Syria now. In Syria, there was a stalemate until there wasn't. The Israel war in Gaza and the regional implications softened Hezbollah and some Iran proxies, and this left Assad and his regime weak. So Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which I'll call HTS from now on, made a move. They saw the weakness in Assad regime. They saw that the Hezbollah support was diverted and weakened by Israel. So they swept the nation in 2 weeks. And what's Turkey's involvement in this? It remains unclear. Many argue, though, that Turkish military presence in northwest Syria and Idlib allowed the space for HTS to operate, to hold territory, to tax commercial activity and transportation, which enabled them to get the weapons and the planning and the logistics done to orchestrate this offensive. So in one way, it was indirect support. We don't know, we don't have proof if there was direct support for HTS's offensive. And also, while Turkish military officials on the ground were probably aware of movements, it does not mean that there was a green light from Ankara for this. That's what the facts are now. We don't have proof, but what does it mean for Turkey? There's been a ton of literature about whether Turkey won or is exposed to more risks in Syria. Basically, the consensus is that Turkey has influence over the new transition government led by HTS. The foreign minister of the new government and many officials lived in Turkey. They studied in Turkish universities. They speak Turkish, and they have, direct links with the government in Ankara. So some say Turkey could shape Syria. Others say if it does not have full control over what HTS is doing, HTS could create conditions that send more refugees to Turkey and complicate Turkey's security and domestic politics. On the ground here in Turkey, the main thing the population wants, according to a recent poll that was released in January by Metropol, main priority is refugee returns. People want refugees to go back, wide majority of Turkish citizens. There's more than 3 million about in Turkey. And the interesting thing that I noted in the poll is that as the peace process is happening, there's a bigger desire for refugee returns than preventing a Kurdish state in Syria. That's where the public priorities are. Refugees are seen as taking jobs and using resources, and there's a lot of anti-refugee rhetoric. So the trend is there to get rid of Syrians. And however you view that situation, the truth is that Syria does not have the capacity for rapid returns. So there might be tensions brewing from prolonged Syrian stays in Turkey, which are inevitable considering that many of the Syrian refugees studied in Turkey and have lives here and have worked and have created families here. So it's going to be a complex, long process for domestic politics. On the foreign policy side, government is pursuing airstrikes in northeast Syria. It's putting pressure on the Kurdish militias, which are linked to PKK, and it supports its own army, which is called the Syrian National Army. It's made of mixed Syrian nationals that have Turkish training and logistical support. And basically, these Turkish-backed forces are expected to continue some kind of clash with Kurdish militias. What's going to happen there is unclear, but that's a point that the US has been commenting on. US officials have been saying that their priority is to keep ISIS detainees within the camps that they're being held. The Kurdish militias are operating those camps, and US officials have said that they don't have plans to withdraw because they don't want repercussions that could lead to ISIS detainees fleeing. And they also said that they don't want Turkey to take unilateral actions that could upset this balance and result in security concerns due to these ISIS detainees. On the Turkish side, many people have been lobbying for transferring the ISIS detainees to the Damascus government. And that's a solution posed by Turkish analysts. What will happen really depends on the Trump administration and its plans in the region. No one that I've talked to said that Trump will prioritize Syria in the short term. So we don't expect a decision on US troop involvement in Syria this year. Main question, other than what's going to happen with Kurds in Syria and the transition process, is what's going to happen between Turkey and Israel. Now you have two main military powers in one, let's say, developing state that has low resources and security concerns in many ways. Some people have made the argument that Turkey could have some clashes with Israel. I don't know whether any of that could happen, but if you have troops in a region where there's conflict their mistakes are possible. So I don't expect any direct confrontation between Turkish and Israel military, but the discourse remains highly negative in Turkey regarding Israel following the Gaza war. And while that discourse remains negative, I would say Erdoğan hasn't taken direct actions apart from moves to reduce trade with Israel. So I would just say the Israel-Turkey issue through Syria remains rhetorical at this point, but something to watch for sure. And the last point, I think that Erdoğan and his rhetoric towards Israel and anti-Zionism occurs for domestic consumption. The lack of further actions like stopping Azeri oil and gas energy exports to Israel, which come out of Turkey, those haven't been taken because of treaty agreements and also because Turkey remains a NATO member. It's part of the Western security system. So while the government takes stances and hosts marches and demonstrations in support of Palestine, the actions don't match the rhetoric. And I think this is because Turkey is a diverse economy without energy resources and depends on foreign investment and stable ties with its NATO and Western allies. That's how the economy has been structured since it was made in the 50s. So the last point that I'm covering briefly is the economy. With the new finance minister Şimşek after the 2023 elections, he's moved through a multi-year process of fighting high inflation in Turkey and drawing more foreign investment. And I think that the main point to highlight to wrap here is that Şimşek is taking a serious fight against inflation, and we have proof because minimum wage in Turkey was hiked incrementally this year. Every new year in Turkey, minimum wage is raised. And this year it was just a small bump. It's about $600 or 600 euros per month. And a large percentage of the Turkish population works for minimum wage. So it is like, it does impact a lot of salaries. And the fact that it was a small bump in the face of high consumer price increases shows that it's going to be a painful period, 2025, in the Turkish economy for most Turkish citizens. But it does show that the financial team is serious about bringing down high inflation, which in December, according to state statistics, is 44%. That's after a financial crisis of one kind or another since 2018. So we're still at 44% inflation here, and minimum wage is 600 US dollars. I think that consumer spending and purchasing power is just going to be very low this year. And yeah, so Turkey has to balance these regional dynamics while keeping foreign investment high because of the lack of local energy resources. I think it's a very complicated period to sum up. I have tried. Hopefully you have stayed with me through this, and I appreciate your attention. If you have other questions, I'm always available at diego@turkeyrecap.com. Write anytime. Thank you for your attention.